This webinar is the latest in the NSF webinar series, and today's topic is 5 ways to ensure successful internal audits. My name is Maria O'Callaghan, and I'm an Executive Director at NSF Health Sciences. Firstly, a little bit about me. I have a master's degree in inorganic chemistry, and I have a lot of years of experience in various roles within the pharmaceutical industry. From humble beginnings as a chemist on an API site, I have held roles in R&D for inhalations, regulatory affairs for a variety of dosage forms such as gels, creams, liquids, and capsules. I have worked with medical devices such as drug-eluting stents, and back to pharma, where I worked for a biotech company manufacturing lyophilized sterile vials of enzyme replacement therapies for rare diseases. I'm eligible to act as a qualified person in Europe, and I spent a number of years doing just that. But early in my career, I trained as an internal auditor, and over the years, I have carried out countless internal audits and supplier audits, as well as being involved in hosting various regulatory audits from bodies such as the FDA, the HPRA in Ireland, and other regulatory bodies around the world, such as Russia and China. I am now a trainer for pharmaceutical lead auditors. I talk to auditors all the time about the challenges they face in carrying out their roles. I have a passion for auditing, though in the past I might not always have appreciated the value of an audit, particularly when I was the auditee. The idea that an audit could be a positive experience would have been alien to me, but my experience to date has taught me that internal audits are possibly one of the most useful tools in a pharmaceutical company's toolbox. Unfortunately, it's not a widely shared opinion. The fact that you're here listening to this, though, gives me confidence that you have at least a curiosity around the topic. So I would like to share my opinion on how you can make the most of this wonderful asset. It's often said that by mistakes we learn. And I guess there's truth in that. If nothing ever goes wrong, then there's little opportunity to identify how they could be better. We just remain in the status quo. And so it is with internal audits. I have witnessed internal audits being performed badly over the course of my career. For example, the same audit schedule every year, 10 departments, 10 audits, just get it done attitude. Deprioritizing internal audits when something else happens, and finding the same things every year without recognizing trends. Can I relate to the following scenario? A couple of people usually from QA who are already overstretched are assigned to audit the warehouse or audit manufacturing next week with no guidance, no preparation, and no support. Often last minute, at least one of the audit team will be pulled into something more urgent, leaving the team short-staffed with the same audit scope. Then, because the auditors are local, there's no formal auditee support, basically expecting the auditors to figure it out themselves because they know where everything is. When they do find things, they're often treated with resentment and fury. Haven't people got enough to be doing without internal auditors coming along creating silly CAPAs for them? The poor auditor often returns to their day job, frustrated to write a report that nobody wants, with no time allocated to it, and then they get threatened with a deviation if their audit report is late. Why would anyone volunteer for that? What's the point? But it ticks the box. There is a completed audit schedule that you can show to regulators. It demonstrates GMP compliance for another year, and we have the CAPAs to prove it. Of course, those CAPAs are probably not the best. They rarely get the rigor they deserve. The auditees remain resentful of having CAPAs in the first place and are not best pleased if they get deviations for ineffective CAPAs. I have, of course, described the very worst case scenario. All of those things are unlikely to happen in one audit, but I have seen them all in various forms, and I'm sure you have too. During the pandemic, a world emergency, one of the first things to suffer was the internal audit program. Why? Because it wasn't considered essential to have people just auditing on a site. In a time when we were trying to limit human contact, it's difficult to argue with that. However, continuing to manufacture at a site was considered essential, which proves my point that auditing is not considered part of the manufacturing process, even though it gets its own chapter in EU GMP, Chapter 9, Self-Inspection. So internal audits are more than a chore. They have to be done. EU GMP, Chapter 1, Pharmaceutical Quality System 1.4.17 states there is a process for self-inspection and or quality audit which regularly appraises the effectiveness of and applicability of the PQS. So there's no avoiding it. There needs to be an internal audit or self-inspection process in place, and there needs to be records that it happened. So the scenario I described, the tick the box exercise, that just might get you through a regulatory audit or a corporate audit, in that doing the audit, you're in compliance. But shouldn't the audit also add value? Our GMPs are designed to protect patients. So our internal audits, being mandated by GMP, means that the spirit of the system should meet that fundamental criteria, do some good. Think about it. If the internal audit program were useful, we'd get more from them than a couple of silly kappas and to update an SOP because of a typo. I regularly train auditors, and one of the first things we ask the group is, why do we audit? Typically, the answers are to see what's going on, to ensure compliance, to find problems before external people do. Because it's a regulatory requirement, is very far down the list, if on the list at all. So fundamentally, people do know why we audit and the value of them. But if your experience of internal audits is anything like that I've just described, and I'm quite sure you've all experienced at least some of it, what needs to change to ensure your internal audit program does more than what it has to do and does what it can do? Thinking about how the internal audits have been done badly might help us to turn it around. Firstly, the plan. Just auditing each department and assuming everything will be covered by default is not a sensible way to set up your audit program. And has the time for the auditors been factored in, or the auditees indeed? You need to invest in the process. Secondly, the audits. The auditors, do they always have to be from QA? Isn't that a very tunneled approach? Doing the same audit every year, finding the same things every year. Basically, last year's audits being done again. Or are they auditing the right things based on the right risks at your site? Are they doing the right audits? Thirdly, what about the observations? Does the auditor think they have to find something and therefore dig and dig until they're in the minutiae and present the auditee with silly non-compliances? Or do the auditees take it seriously enough? Do they just think these people are from QA and it doesn't matter? Or are the auditors nose blind to issues? Are they so used to poor practice that they can't recognize it anymore? You need to sweat the small stuff. You need to see the areas during your internal audits as though you are an outsider. Who does the audits? Are the auditors even trained to audit? Do they have the skills? Or are they just winging it and hoping for the best? To the auditee, auditing looks easy. Turn up, ask some questions, give observations. But it is a skill that needs to be practiced, and there's specific training available that auditors should receive. On the audit process, the investment is worth it. Train the auditors, and don't forget to follow up. Are the CAPAs going to be meaningful? Is anything going to change? Is anything going to get better after the audit? Are your senior managers invested and interested? Are they encouraging the auditors to perform well? Do they show interest beyond the numbers at management review? Are the trends identified? Is CAPA effectiveness of audit CAPAs interrogated? So my 5 top tips are: invest in the process and take them seriously. Do the right audits. Sweat the small stuff and put your best foot forward always, regardless of who the auditor is. Train the auditors, invest in the training of them. Make better use of your CAPAs when you follow up. So let's go through each of these one by one and think about why we do the audits and how to benefit from them. In my experience, everyone starts the year with great intentions. The year stretches ahead like a new copybook, and everyone is determined that this year it will be different. We will reach Q4 with all the goals met, all the metrics green. So we plan our internal audits, a lovely Excel spreadsheet with about 12 audits, nicely spaced out, 2 or 3 auditors assigned to each, time scheduled for the report writing, calendar appointments sent out, and off we go. And then life happens. The first hurdle is getting people to agree the dates and accept the calendar invites. Grudgingly, the later ones will probably be easy enough to get agreed because no one has anything in their calendar for out then anyway. The first couple of audits might even get done as planned. But then something deemed more important happens, like an urgent deviation or investigation, or a real, that is, regulatory or corporate audit pops up, and the audit is cut short, or an auditor or an auditee is pulled or unavailable, and the whole area is distracted. Perhaps leaves or downsizing in the department, and you realize that you can't possibly afford to have 2 auditors on every audit. And do you really need all those audits anyway? So a couple get cancelled, or are late, or are combined, which really means that the scope just doubles for the same number of auditors. And they become really pretty pointless tick the box exercises with a few obvious CAPAs to update SOPs. And you end up with deviations for not sticking to the schedule, and the CAPA for the deviation: do better next time. But what if we bit the bullet and did the audits anyway? Invested the time in the auditors, avoided the deviations for not having done the audits, gave sufficient time to a smaller number of audits that were really effective, and gave the QMS a really good interrogation, and put CAPAs in place for the things that really matter. Now there's a thought. Maybe the audits would provide something valuable, and they will if you do the right audits. It's a terrible idea to just do the same audits every year, audit the same department in the same schedule. The internal audit schedule should be based on the risks at your site. But what are the inputs for the risk assessment? Start with what you already have, your metrics, which, by the way, are often seen as another chore and not given the value that they deserve. You're mandated by ICHQ 10 to have management reviews anyway, which includes metrics. So why might not make another use of them? But what metrics should you use? There are a couple of obvious ones: complaints, out of specs, deviations, recalls, and the not so obvious ones, such as the revision of SOPs. Are there a couple of SOPs that are invariably the root cause of deviations, or are constantly being updated for clarification? First time, is there a lot of rework? It's not just the batches, but of processes in general. Facilities. When there is the announcement of an external audit, are your facilities department overrun with jobs to do to get the place audit ready? If so, why? Why does your internal audit system not find these issues? And if they do, why are they not acted on? Staff can be an indication of all's not well. Do departments have a lot of new people? This can also be a risk, and including those departments early in your internal audit program might be a good idea. Use your metrics as well as your insider knowledge and inputs from your experts on site to really inform a useful risk assessment to give you a really useful audit schedule. Take a leaf out of the regulator's book. You don't have to audit departments or even systems. You can audit an entire process, which will touch on multiple systems. A well-designed schedule that covers all elements of the QMS does not necessarily have to be onerous. You could find that you're doing less audits, but gathering lots more useful intelligence. We know that too often internal audits are seen as a chore, a nuisance, a waste of everyone's time. Because they are internal, it's all too easy to defer them, fob off the auditors, let the auditors dig out the answers for themselves because they're local and they know where everything is. But what if you gave the internal audits the same attention you'd give any audit? It's useful to look at your systems through someone else's eyes and stop ignoring the dirty ceiling tile or the chipped skirting boards and address the things that will make a negative first impression to an outsider. Really look, not just glance. It's well known that people respond to their surroundings. If an area is untidy, unkempt, unloved, this will give people the impression that the small things don't matter. And when the small things get missed, big things can be missed too. A site where there is no tolerance for shoddiness, where bumps and scratches get noticed and fixed as soon as they happen, demonstrates to everyone working there that the little things matter. Make people feel it matters that they're in a clean, comfortable surroundings, and they will respond accordingly. Your internal auditors shouldn't be spending their time looking at SOPs on a computer or buried in paperwork. They need to be out and about, really looking at the area as though seeing it for the first time. They need to be not afraid to highlight dirty walls, broken tiles, dusty corners, and their auditees need to appreciate these things being highlighted. Everyone's on the same team after all. Ensuring your internal audits turn the dials that need turning will depend in no small part on the relationship between your auditors and the auditees. And this will be down to the effectiveness of the auditors. What is an effective auditor? I bet if I asked for examples of an ineffective auditor, lots of examples would spring to mind. Not a good listener, jumping to conclusions, judgmental, nitpicking, rude. It's always easier to remember the bad ones. But there are good auditors too. And really, you should make sure that the auditors you choose for your internal audits are the best they can be. There are personality traits that auditors need to work on if they don't come naturally. Being able to build rapport with your auditee is very important, but being tenacious and able to follow up and not taking the first answer, that's another skill that needs to be developed. In an internal audit, there's no room for a them and us mentality. You don't need auditors on a power trip trying to score points against colleagues or another department. The auditor needs to conduct the audit in the spirit of cooperation. After all, they're part of the same team. And any negative external audit will impact just as badly on them. The auditor should feel confident in pointing out deficiencies in a safe and receptive environment. But they should also be able to point out those deficiencies in a collaborative and respectful way. Auditors should be trained to appropriate levels of GMP, not compliance for compliance sake, but really aware of the risk to patients and the risk to compliance. They need to be open to challenge. After all, compliance isn't an absolute in that there's more than one way to be compliant, but they need to be familiar enough with the guidelines to be able to effectively navigate those challenges. Formal internal auditor training is available through NSF, and it's worth having at least some of your internal auditors formally trained. This will help ensure that good auditing practices are embedded in your systems, and trained auditors will be able to practice the skills required to make the most of the auditing time allowed. But it doesn't end with the closeout meeting. Follow-up is crucial to ensure that the audit is effective. Make sure your team is encouraged to create meaningful CAPAs. There's no point in just fixing what was found. Without going wider. If there are any housekeeping issues in one area, yes, fix it and tidy it up and address it. But look at the wider site. Is there complacency creeping in? Are things slipping? Have people become blind to housekeeping issues? Where possible, look at observations holistically. If an issue is found in sample receipt in the microbiology lab, is it possible that the chemistry lab could have the same issue? Don't just look at the issue in isolation, but look at sample receipt process generally and make sure that similar systems have similar processes. Having as much standardization as possible across a site makes life easier for everyone. And your internal audit program is an ideal opportunity to assess whether misalignments or anomalies are occurring. Likewise with documentation. Are signatures missing from logbooks? Is the information somewhere else? Think about whether the logbooks are actually needed, rather than just putting in a CAPA to train people to fill out a logbook. Look for opportunities to improve and not just tick the box. A really effective audit should result in positive change. If nothing changes, did it really happen? Was it worth it? We must encourage a positive outlook towards audits. Don't let the word audit strike fear in your teams. See audits, particularly your internal audits, as a positive experience, not something that is done to you, leaving you with copious CAPAs that distract from the day-to-day. See your internal audits as an opportunity to get into the detail of what's really happening on the shop floor. Finding potential issues before they're discovered by someone else, finding opportunities for improvement and standardization, and giving your team the opportunity to practice putting their best foot forward. Everything we've been discussing today will hopefully paint a more positive picture of internal audits and how they could be. But summing it up, I would say, embrace the process. Good manufacturing practice exists to ensure that products are made in accordance with appropriate quality standards and current industry best practice, and that they comply with the applicable health authority regulatory requirements and guidance. As regulations continue to tighten, authorities are demanding increased vigilance of the pharmaceutical supply chain and emphasizing the need for audits, including our internal audits. We are required to have GMP internal audits conducted by appropriately qualified and trained auditors. Not only will compliance with this aspect of GMP help us to meet the drug product requirements, but the results of those audits provide management with information on how effectively the quality of their processes and products is being controlled. Get in touch with us to find out more about how we can help you with your auditing requirements by emailing us at healthsciences@nsf.org. Thank you again for joining me today. I hope I've been able to inspire you to appreciate the potential value of your internal audit process.